All right, welcome back to the Metric Stack podcast. Today, we're joined by Lawrence Quan, head of revenue operations at Rewind. Lawrence specializes in go-to-market strategy, growth marketing, revenue operations, and automation. Prior to joining Rewind, Lawrence was at Clearco, formerly Clearbank, Klipfolio. So we know Lawrence actually quite well, and he was also at EA Sports NHL. He's also the co-founder of LQ Growth Consulting, a growth marketing and digital advertising consultancy for SaaS and e-commerce businesses. I'm joined by Lauren Thibodeau, and my name is Allan Ville. Welcome to the episode, Lawrence. We're super happy to have you.
Yeah, I'm really excited to chat with all of you today. Good to see you again, Allan.
For sure.
Thanks so much. So I'm going to jump in, Lawrence, with kind of a first question, which is really, could you set the stage for us? We're going to talk a little bit about ad impressions, but that's just one metric in a much bigger context. So can you just set the stage?
Absolutely. So I think, the people that would care about this and the people that should be thinking about ad impressions are probably the people that are running your ads. This is anybody that's spending money, $1, $100,000, $1 million a month on ads. There's things like impressions, there's clicks. This is probably where the conversation is going to swirl around today.
Let's chat about that a little bit as well. I mean, you've picked ad impressions, and we'll dive into why that one is the one that you wanted to chat about. But kind of what's the other stuff that people will hear about? I know there's reach, and there's views and clicks and all sorts of other kind of definitions that, as somebody who's slightly on the outside, you may sort of say to yourself, what do all these different definitions mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I speak to a lot of founders, and I think, when you look at marketing, there's really like the outputs of marketing, right? And let's take like this in a context like a SaaS business, right? If you're talking to the CEO, you're talking to a founder, you're often not talking about impressions. You're talking about, things like leads, MQLs, inbound deals, different things like how you're making inputs to revenue and generating marketing pipeline. But as a marketer that actually owns that funnel, it's really important to think of all these leading indicators, right? Like reach, which is how many people you're getting your ads in front of. Impressions, which we'll talk about, is just like how many times your ads being seen on somebody's screen. Clicks, your web conversion rate, your web signups. Really, as a person that's going to eventually own the lead or MQL number, impressions and all those other metrics are something that you're really going to care about, because they're the inputs to make sure that you're hitting your lead volume and, being conscious about your unit economics, which is really, really important for anybody doing performance marketing.
So this is like super high up in the funnel. And you're right. I mean, oftentimes, when we get together and talk about the funnel for most organizations starts when, not even website traffic, but it really starts, from the lead to MQL, SQL, win, et cetera, right? So this is stuff that most executive teams might not even dive into. But you're right. I mean, you kind of need that stuff, and you need to be measuring it to have an impact, further down funnel.
Absolutely. Like the founder may not care about it, but in a way, your ad impressions can really impact the numbers that the people that that manage you or that you report to do really care about. Your ad impressions are a really big leading indicator. They can be a signal of either things going right or things going wrong. And, sometimes with ads, you're trying to diagnose exactly what's happening. Why am I seeing great performance this week when my performance last week maybe wasn't so great? Or vice versa, where I'm trying to diagnose like why did my lead cost jump up? Or, why am I not seeing the amount of leads that I expect to see this week?
Yeah, that's great. And love that concept, Lawrence, of kind of a leading indicator, that input that's going to come before the desired outputs that you want. Can you just really get into the nitty gritty for a second and just define, what do ad impressions mean? And how do you actually track it and measure it?
So maybe I'll put in an example. So let's say we're running Facebook ads, right? I put an ad out to the world, and impressions are going to be count of the number of times that particular digital ad has displayed on somebody's screen, right? So this is just like the number of times, like imagine even a billboard, right? Is like how many people have walked by your billboard. And obviously in the digital context, you can track it really, really closely. So, your ad platforms like Facebook or Google or LinkedIn are going to count this. They're going to show how many times your ad loaded, your ad displayed, and show that to you. And I think in contrast, I think reach kind of can be a similar thing, but reach is the unique amount of where ad impressions is the total amount. So it's the number of reach times the frequency kind of thing.
Okay. So impressions is the biggest number, then comes reach. And I'm sort of guessing here a little bit, but does then come engagement? Like you want to measure how many people actually engaged somehow, or is that sort of, a sidestepping kind of this whole?
I think that's maybe like, the next step. Like in order for somebody to click or to really, that ad for, to use like a different word, but to have an impression on them, for them to remember it or think about it or consider it, ad impressions and reach are really kind of like the quantification of your total population almost, right? Like you mentioned, it's the biggest number. And when it comes to ads, it's really your top of funnel.
And so why do you start there? Why do you care about that massive top of the funnel? Because I mean, you could argue that most of the people there are actually never going to end up being a lead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when a lot of performance marketers, they'll think of the funnel, right? And when it comes to ads, you're going to have some spillage, right? But the hope is that in that total population, there's a good proportion of them that are a good fit for your business, right? And this is like any good performance marketer, they're going to focus on your targeting. They're going to focus on, am I on the right channel? Am I on these, the right path? But with your impressions, you're just trying to figure out, am I getting my ad out to the world? Because even one of the kind of basic problems that we run into with people that are learning to run ads is that they're like, I'm not seeing any impressions. I'm not seeing my ads get out to the world, and that's where people start to realize the actual mechanics of how these ads deliver and how they work, right? Every time you open Facebook or Instagram, there's an auction that's happening kind of instantaneously that's determining which ad is going to be there, right? And if your ad impressions are really low, if you have no ad impressions, if they're not what you expect, it could be that you're just not winning in those auctions, or that something's off from like a technical optimization standpoint.
Now, so is that really a matter of price, or is it a matter of kind of targeting? I suspect it's kind of a, combination of the two of those things. But I mean, that seems like some really good tactical advice, right? You put the ad out, you have a thesis, and all of a sudden, you're not getting what you expected. What do you do?
Yeah. So, I mean, on the simplest terms, like both, like you mentioned, there's a couple factors that determine like, why did my particular ad show up on my audience's screen versus any of my competitors? And especially in the digital ad world, we're not just competing against the businesses that are going after the same audience. We're competing against literally anything else that could grab their attention from an ad, right? That could be Walmart. It could be Pepsi. It could be anything like this, right? So, if you're putting your ad out to the world, you want to just make sure that it's actually delivering, it's actually getting in front of the right people. And I think like a big factor of it is actually like the cost that you're paying to put it in front of those.
So now, let me just segment the market though too, because are impressions something that exists both within search marketing as well as display marketing, or is it really just display marketing?
No, like even with like any type of advertising, generally you do impressions a factor in there, right? And obviously, like I'm coming at it from a digital standpoint. So yeah, that's like Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Bing, really anywhere that you could pay to put your ad in front of the audience. But obviously, like ad impressions are kind of reviewed across multiple different things. You could think of even like a bus stop as like how many people are going to relatively like go by that or see that per day.
Okay, so really it is a universal metric. Like it works across search, right? Where there's, huge intent because somebody's actually searching for something. It works across display where you're really trying to find this algorithmic, match between somebody's behavior or somebody's history and what you're trying to offer. So top of funnel, works for both, both sides of that equation. And that's how you sort of start bringing the funnel down into something that is, sellable and marketable.
Absolutely.
I want to pick up on that and actually ask you. So we've talked about, getting the most impressions you can or getting these impressions. We've talked about them getting in front of the right people. So in your experience, both yourself doing growth marketing and maybe with other clients, are you seeing if you get, a larger number of ad impressions to the right audience, does that always translate into, higher engagement down the funnel, higher MQLs or not? And if not, why not?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think like relevance is so important, right? Like there's definitely a benefit to people seeing your ad. They might know a friend, they might know, their partner could be a potential purchaser. But I think one of the first places that people look when they're trying to decrease their lead costs or CPA or even cost per click is, am I putting my ads in front of audiences that I know don't have a high probability of clicking, right? If you're putting out, if you're seeing like you've got a really strong ad impression number, you're getting in front of a lot of people, but you're not seeing any engagement come out of it. You're seeing your cost per click's really high. It means you're paying to get in front of all these different eyeballs, but you might not be getting in front of the right eyeballs. And honestly, when I'm working with clients, this is one of the first places that I'll look through audiences, see who we're getting in front of, and start to cut. You're going to see that, especially with ads, that 80-20 rule tends to apply, is that a lot of your conversions, a lot of your clicks, a lot of your engagement is going to come from 20% of the impressions that you put out to the world.
And so it's measuring the engagement and the clicks, and then anything that's further down funnel that influences how you refine or how you cut, the impressions that you're trying to.
Absolutely. Like I think, ad impressions, they're not something that people are generally trying to maximize, right? Mm-hmm. Unless it was like an awareness campaign for, let's say like a Sick Kids or a Chio or something like that, right? Like this is general interest and you really need the world to care and know about these things. But I'd say from a B2B and even a B2C standpoint, you're really trying to generate by spending less on advertising than you're going to make in revenue. So you want to be really meticulous about your impression.
Yeah, so that's a good point, right? I mean, depending on what your strategy is, if you have a brand awareness strategy, yes, you may care more about having a large and broad top of funnel, like the impressions and reach. If you have more of a traditional business selling kind of strategy, then yeah, absolutely. The quality, the context, the relevancy, of metrics downstream will matter more, and you need to be more specific about, who you're targeting, from the top of funnel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you find that this metric is the same across Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, all the other kind of platforms, advertising platforms? Is this something that you can compare, or are there differences between these platforms in the way they measure it?
Yeah, I think generally, yes. The way that you would look and interpret impressions can be pretty similar. I think impressions in different places mean different things, though, right? An impression on Google search means that somebody search specific, like let's say you're targeting, like Klipfolio, for example, you're targeting like business dashboards or data visualization. When you get an impression in that sense, it means somebody searched for your product and you were there. That's fantastic. That's really, really high value. Let's say, I've done some Reddit advertising too. You don't have the ability on some platforms to be as precise about the audience that you're getting in front of, right? So it can be a little bit more difficult to gauge what the value of that impression means to your business, right? You're bidding on a specific subreddit, and yeah, maybe it's the like data science subreddit or data visualization subreddit, but is this the person that is searching to buy tools and influence things in their business, or is this somebody that just is interested in pretty graphs?
Yeah, again, so you look further down funnel to see if those sources produce the outcomes that you're looking for. Maybe just on a quick aside, I've actually heard from a number of founders that they really like going to these, off the beaten track. Not that Reddit is off the beaten track anymore, but it definitely is, there's sort of a niche, fandom there in these circles. Do you find that there's gold in some of these specific advertising arenas, versus just going straight to the big, huge players, even though the big players have got incredible tools to segment and slice them?
Yeah, I think a mistake that a lot of businesses make is thinking like Facebook, Google is going to be like the pure moneymaker, right? In a lot of cases, there is always a spot for kind of like, let's say like Google, for example, in your strategy, right? But I think a lot of businesses are scared to look at things that are outside of those paths. At Rewind, for example, we have a vertical that we service, which is developers, right? Like people that manage their GitHub instances. And, a Facebook or an Instagram isn't always the best spot to find them, right? So we go and actually go scour around for online communities and places where these people like aggregate online, and buying ad space there is much more valuable to us. But the difference is that it takes more upfront work to try to find these placements, and the platforms to put ads out are often a lot more difficult than just spinning up Facebook ad or a Google ad within like 5-10 minutes, right? I think it's actually a mistake that a lot of people make, is just assuming that because it worked for everybody else, it's going to work for our particular business.
Yeah. I mean, who knew that you had to work hard to make money, right? So
big takeaway.
That's fantastic. You've talked a lot. We've talked about a number of metrics that really you need to look at in context, because ad impressions is at that top of the funnel. Are there any other metrics that come to mind that maybe we haven't touched on yet that really, marketers should be looking at in conjunction with this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you're looking at your impressions, I always look at them from a sense of like unit economics, right? And I think this is the pressure that a lot of marketers feel, especially with advertising versus other marketing channels. Digital ads are the most easily trackable, right? Versus, investing in your blog, investing in a billboard or like trade shows or something like this. Digital ads, you can track, I spent this amount of money to the second and I got these things, right? So when I'm looking at impressions, like cost per thousand or like CPM is another like big one that I look at, right? This is, what is the kind of price that you're paying per 1,000 impressions, right? So I think the way that you can interpret the CPM metric is, what am I paying per 1,000 impressions on this channel versus this channel, right? Is Facebook more expensive than Google? Or am I on one of these niche placements, like one of our developer communities or something, where our CPM might be way more expensive, but I can relatively model and expect that I'm getting like way higher quality impressions, right? So I think something I'd encourage people to think about is every metric when you're thinking of impressions, clicks, anything like that in your funnel, looking at cost per whatever that metric is so important, because every step of the way, your costs, let's say like CPM, can be a big leading indicator to what your lead cost is going to look like, right? LinkedIn notoriously is a little bit expensive for B2B advertisers versus other channels. And I think it scares people away, right? The number one thing when people are reaching out to my consultancy about, can we run ads on LinkedIn? They'll tell me, but I hear it's really expensive. I'm like, yeah, it is. But look at the powers that you have to target your audience and get in front of them versus Facebook. Like, do you really think your B2B audience is scrolling around on Facebook and Instagram trying to figure out which enterprise tool they should be buying?
So are you using some sort of a quality ratio as well? Are you taking, leads per impression or something like that, or MQLs per impression or wins per impression? Is there some sort of a ratio there as well that is like the one that you rely on for quality?
Yeah. Honestly, at that stage early in the funnel, I'm generally looking at click-through rate. What portion of the people that see my ad are taking action and clicking? Right. And this is again, like, I think it's a measure of, how good is my targeting? How good is my ad creative? And I think people don't also like consider that an investment in ad creative can really be the difference between, getting somebody to take action and somebody just scrolling past it. Right. Like, I think there's a couple lines that go around digital advertisers where, the first few times you see an ad, you're just going to scroll past it. But then the fourth time you're like, oh, I keep getting this ad. Like, what is this? And maybe the 10th time you go click it, right? So yeah, I'm looking at things like click through rate.
Very quick question. So like modern platforms today, are they targeting individuals? Or are they targeting IP addresses? Like, you get the whole family is starting to see a certain ad based on your behavior. Sort of, like if you go visit a website, all of a sudden you start seeing certain ads, right? Now, I was sitting at home and I think my wife on her cell phone, was perusing some shopping site, and before you know it, I'm getting ads for this, this kind of this vest, that she was looking at. I'm on a totally different device, but it's the same kind of IP range. How should advertisers think about that? And does that influence some of the thinking around, who you're going after?
Yeah. It's kind of like the, like my phone listening to me kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I think like it that can be so dependent on your business, right? And I think with the e-commerce businesses that I work with, there's such an interesting behavior in these kind of like, I guess like influencers of the purchase, right? I think when you're an advertiser and you're thinking about that, it's like, I know who the buyer is, and I'm thinking of like, who around them am I okay with being in these impressions? Because I know they might shift some weight around there. For example, like I get a travel ad. It's really great if my partner gets the same ad, because she might come to me and be like, oh, I've been seeing a lot about Cancun lately. Can we go, right?
I love this sort of the background hints, right? Maybe this is a birthday present that I should be buying, right? So
Yeah, there you go.
yeah, totally. Lawrence, any last advice for advertisers starting to think about impressions, top of funnel, how they should, approach this whole, area and how they should think about spend?
Yeah. I think the first thing is, before we're all, as a digital marketer, there's so many tools and there's so many things and there's a lot of widgets related to like Facebook ads and Google ads, and knowing the platforms themselves. And something that I talk to a lot of marketers about is like, don't forget the value of just good marketing. Who is my audience? What do they care about? What can I put in front of them? And how do I just launch a good campaign around that, right? Like, it's very easy to get lost in this particular metric and this particular metric, where it's so important as a marketer to have that data side and to be able to interpret it and understand, like, what does this actually mean, right? If my click-through rate is dropping, what does it mean? If I'm not getting any impressions, what does it mean? Is it Facebook's fault? Is it the platform's fault? Did I not click the right button or toggle the right thing? Or do I just not have an ad that's relevant to the audience that I'm trying to advertise to, right? I think people need to continue to put the human side into marketing and remember that these metrics, the tools that are available, they're tools. Like, there are things that help us understand our business, but they're not the entirety of it, right? Metrics as a whole, they're tools to inform business decisions, but they don't need to be prescriptive. We still need to look at and understand. And that's why I love what you're doing with this podcast to help people understand, these are the things that you should think about and the deeper context when you're just looking at a number on a page. There's so much that goes into each individual metric.
Lawrence, words of wisdom. Thank you so much on sort of the relevancy of the ads, on being human about the story, about understanding the data. Lawrence Quan is head of revenue operations at Rewind, growth marketer. Lawrence, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed today's conversation about metrics and data, be sure to check out Metric HQ, our online resource for the metrics that matter most to you and your business.